Hi, this is Lois Bowers, editor of McKnight Senior Living, and today I'm joined by Stan Szpytek, president of Fire and Life Safety Incorporated and a frequent contributor to McKnight's publications on emergency preparedness and life safety topics. Additionally, he is the retained consultant for the Arizona Healthcare Association, the California Association of Health Facilities, and the Utah Healthcare Association. Stan, thank you very much for being here today.
It's always a pleasure, Lois. Glad to be here.
Now, you recently had an interesting experience in Hawaii when a tsunami threatened. Could you talk a little bit about that and share what you took away from it as an expert in emergency preparedness and what senior living providers might take from it?
Well, it was such an interesting experience. Here I am in Hawaii with my wife on vacation, celebrating a special birthday that ends in a 0, but I won't tell you the first number. She might not like that. But it was a normal day until it wasn't. And interestingly enough, the night before her birthday, we go down to the beach. We're gazing at the stars, listening to the surf. I even saw a shooting star. And out of the blue, she asks me, what are the chances of a tsunami just coming and sweeping us away? Well, one of the things that we're talking about in emergency preparedness is a concept called optimistic bias. Well, I've never experienced a tsunami before. I had no reason to say this, but I said, not a chance. There's no way that we'll experience a tsunami. Little did I know, 15 hours later, after spending the day at the beach, we come back to the resort, everybody's phone is going off. I went to the pool, met up with some of the other vacationers, and I said, is it a wildfire? Is it a Amber Alert for a missing child? And they're like, no, massive earthquake in Russia, and the Hawaiian Islands are on a tsunami alert. And I got to tell you, that article that I wrote for your publication, it gave me a wave of empathy that I never thought I would experience, because at first I'm like, this can't be happening. I started to feel like what I think some of our providers feel when there's an approaching hurricane or a wildfire, and the walls kind of started to close in, and I have to admit that I'm like, I don't have an experience with this. What am I going to do? Finally, I kind of adjusted into the mode that we teach our providers. You've got to either evacuate or you've got to shelter in place. So after weighing the odds, the likelihood of a catastrophe, while maybe relatively low, it still was possible. So we had to evacuate to higher ground. All of my wife's plans and all the special things that I had put in place, pun intended, were washed away. And we had to sit out the tsunami. So the designated time, 7:17 p.m., I'll remember it for the rest of my life. We waited for the ocean to swell, we waited for the waves to hit, and nothing happened. And it was interesting. The dynamic was interesting because civil services told us that we can't go back, that the real danger in a tsunami are secondary waves, not the first wave. So for 6 hours, we were evacuated from the resort. When we finally went back, I also got this empathetic feeling about how people who do evacuate for wildfires and hurricanes, you would think that there'd be a level of gratitude. You come back, everything is still the same. And it's almost like, did I make the wrong decision? So there was so much emotion involved with it that it was really a lesson for a guy that's been doing this since 1977 as a former first responder. Don't ever think that you know it all, because you'll get a tsunami alert or you'll get something that you just never were expecting.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Well, another big news story this year has been the July fire at an assisted living community in Massachusetts, which resulted in fatalities and injuries. Yes. A final report about the investigation was just released, and I wondered if you could talk about what lessons senior living providers can take away from the incident.
The biggest lesson when it comes to fires and fire suppression systems, fire protection systems, is that they require a lot of tender, loving care. Compliance and the safe operation of these systems doesn't happen by accident. There is a ton of inspection, testing, and maintenance that goes into maintaining these systems. They've got to be inspected so that we know that they're reliable. They need to be tested. They've got to be maintained. And I know that a lot of the information, as it's starting to slowly come to fruition out of that deadly fire, is that there might have been some lack of maintenance or some failures of the system. And to me, I was a deputy fire chief. I responded to many calls. I had senior living communities in my jurisdiction. I couldn't imagine losing one resident, let alone 10. And it was a horrific situation. As you can imagine, I followed it moment by moment. I was even watching it live stream as it was happening. And I thought to myself, it didn't appear that there was a lot of fire damage externally from the building. I went to sleep probably at about midnight Pacific time, and of course this happened in the East Coast. They still had not released any kind of information, but the next morning when I woke up, I was floored to find out that initially 9 people died in that fire. And some of the things that are coming out of it was that the system might not have operated as designed. Another new element of the report is that there wasn't smoke separations in the building like we see in our skilled nursing facility. And there's a lot of conjecture that local oversight versus federal oversight that we see in skilled nursing might have been a contributing factor, because assisted living generally is regulated by state regulations, and then they defer to local fire codes and life safety codes. And those are different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So a lot of questions, a very sad story, a sad testament to fire protection, but we've got to learn and we've got to be better.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And another incident earlier this year, a Pennsylvania continuing care retirement community located near an airport experienced a plane crash and a fire in its parking lot. You spoke with me afterwards and said it served as another reminder of the importance of having an all hazards plan. Could you talk about what an all hazards plan should include and what it takes to create one?
Yeah, nobody would expect that a provider would have an aircraft crash plan. Well, maybe if they were close proximity to an airport. I've got a client in Arizona. Their senior living community is right near the end as the crow flies from Luke Air Force Base. So there are fighters that are taking off from there all day long and going directly over the facility. But you don't expect these kinds of extraordinary things to happen, but you never know the nuances of any circumstance. Another incident that comes to mind, and I know you're familiar with it, was a fire in a senior living community in Long Beach, California. Actually, it was an affordable housing building, and a resident started a fire, and when the fire department got on the scene, that same resident also turned into an active shooter and killed a fire captain. And it was a terrible situation, but who's going to have a plan that says when your fire converts into a shooter, an all hazards plan takes the approach that regardless of what the root cause of an emergency is, you've got a way to understand what your hazards and perils are, and that's called hazard vulnerability assessment. You and I and the rest of your team have talked about that before. You need to know the perils so that you can plan for response. And then when it comes to response, I go back to the time when I was a firefighter and a fire chief. Universally throughout the United States, there's one system of command and control, and that's what we call the incident command system. So that when the incident commander, who could be a firefighter or might be a battalion chief or a captain, they've got to manage chaos, and they do that by utilizing what's called the incident command system. So when that tornado touches down and causes a mass casualty incident, or gas leaks, or like we saw with some serious flooding in Globe, Arizona recently, we had some massive rain. There were tanks of propane that were floating down Main Street because the water inundation went into a storage yard, and the next thing you know, you've got these propane tanks slamming into bridges, into buildings. Nobody's got a plan for that. But if you got an all hazards plan, it will allow you to manage chaos by using this system of command and control. One person is in charge, and that person is the incident commander. Tomorrow, here at AHCA NCAL, a colleague of mine, Jason Belden from California, we're going to present a session on emergency preparedness compliance, a frontline focus, and we call it Think Like an Incident Commander. And what we're going to do is make a persuasive case to our attendees, which will be administrators and regional people and everybody here at the show that will come to our session. You can't just train your leadership. You got to understand that frontline staff will always be at the facility, so they need to know what all hazards is all about as well.
Okay, thank you. Well, various holidays are coming up, so this seems like a good time to remind providers about decorations in their communities. Could you remind listeners of some best practices to keep their residents and staff safe?
Yep. Well, when I was on the fire department and I was a fire marshal, I would do my annual Bah Humbug inspection. And my providers, I had 3 nursing homes, I had a senior living community where my mom lives today, I had a memory care facility, I had assisted living facilities in the jurisdiction, and I get it. And the reason that I'm a consultant today is that I understood the important work that the senior living care force does, and I know how important it is to create that home-like environment inside of our facilities and our homes and such. But sometimes people get a little carried away. I've seen everything from the mistletoe hanging from a sprinkler head in independent living residence rooms, and when I meet with residents, and I do that with a lot of my clients, and I remind usually the ladies, you can't do it. As much of a good strategic point that might seem like, you can't hang anything on the sprinkler head. I've seen Halloween decorations that have completely obstructed fire extinguishers, the manual pull stations. I had one facility in a western state. They had a competition between the A shift and the B shift at a facility where each was designated a hall, and they had to decorate it. They did an outstanding job, but they compromised every element of fire protection in the building. So with the seasonal holidays coming, especially around Christmas time, Jewish holidays, candles, live decorations. In our own homes, they're sometimes part of it, but in regulated care facilities and senior living communities, we just got to be extra careful. We can't compromise those fire suppression and fire protection systems. We've got to be mindful of our means of egress. I remember one assisted living facility, I think it was Thanksgiving and Halloween, and they had the bales of hay right at the front door obstructing the main exit out of the building. So be creative, but be mindful of safety and preparedness.
Okay. Well, if there's one message you want to be sure senior living listeners take away from our discussion today, what would it be?
Well, it's like I tell staff, and one of the best parts of my job is training our frontline staff and meeting with our residents. And I give them both the same message. I start out with it, I end with it, and some of my articles that I've written for you kind of prevail with that attitude. It's a normal day until it isn't. That plane crash at the facility, the community, I think outside of Harrisburg or somewhere in Pennsylvania, maybe it was Lancaster County, they never thought that plane would crash 30 feet from the side of the building, but you've got to expect civil unrest, criminal activity, accidental things. Nature is rearing its ugly head sometimes, and we've got to be ready for anything.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks for all of those insights, Stan. This is Lois Bowers, editor of McKnight Senior Living, and I've been speaking with Stan Szpytek, president of Fire and Life Safety Incorporated. Stan, thanks for making time for us today.
Thank you, Lois.